I'm Ryan O'Dowd, and you're listening to Ryan's Audiobooks on the Issues Magazine YouTube channel. Today I continue with Section 5.9, Coup D'Etat by Edward Luttwak. We're continuing with Chapter 3, The Strategy of the Coup D'Etat. Neutralizing the police. The flags and uniforms of the military forces of different countries are very different, but the structure and organization tend to be very similar, since they reflect the universality of modern technology. The tactical implications of weapons and ancillary equipment impose a certain uniformity on military organization, and this has enabled us to study their infiltration in terms which are generally applicable. Police forces, however, are shaped by the social and political conditions of the society they serve, and are therefore very diverse. Policemen can be armed very heavily or not at all. They can be concentrated in mobile and hard-hitting units, or dispersed in small groups. They can be controlled by the Ministry of Defense and thus have a military training and outlook, or by the local community, and be extremely civilian-minded. Though their structure is so diverse, police forces resemble each other in the purposes they serve: the prevention and the detection of crime and the maintenance of public order. The criminal side of police work involves the countrywide network of police stations supported by special detective units in the larger centers. The maintenance of public order, however, is carried out by separate paramilitary forces, or where there are no such forces, by concentrating and deploying ordinary policemen taken from their other work. Police work also includes an intelligence element. Information is gathered informally by the entire police apparatus and their informers, but there will usually be a special section of the police whose only function is in this area. The intelligence aspect of police work will be effectively neutralized by our generally defensive effort, vis-a-vis the security services, which is discussed in the next section. Paramilitary forces do not exist in Britain, where there are provisions for the army to act in support of civil power, but they are extensively employed in many other countries. In France, for example, there are two police forces, the Sûreté Nationale and the Prefecture de Police, but there is also a paramilitary force which normally acts as the rural police, the gendarmerie. The gendarmerie is controlled by the Ministry of Defense, and its officers are integrated in the ranks of the armed forces, while the men receive a light infantry training as well as their police training. It numbers about 63,000 men and is organized into departmental forces which are scattered in small groups all over the countryside and into mobile groups which are concentrated in large units called legions. We can ignore the departmental forces because they would probably be unable to intervene within the short time span of a coup, but the mobile units, each of which consists of 7 squadrons of truck gendarmes and 1 armored car squadron, represent a very formidable force that would have to be neutralized or isolated. The mobile gendarmerie lives in military-type barracks and are equipped with the submachine guns and heavier infantry weapons. Their armored cars, 13-ton wheeled vehicles with 40mm armor, can only be stopped with standard anti-tank weaponry. Officially, the gendarmerie, unlike the other two police forces, has no intelligence service, but during the Algerian War, a security section was set up and, as bureaucratic organizations often do, has survived the demise of its original function. The Sûreté Nationale, which carries out police work in population centers of more than 10,000 inhabitants, except for Paris and its suburbs, is largely composed of CID men and dispersed policemen, but it also has a paramilitary force. This is the Compagnie Républicaine de Sécurité, CRS. Its number is about 13,500 men, and they are trained and equipped in a manner like that of the mobile units of the gendarmerie, minus the armored cars. The CRS is staffed with personnel which has been carefully screened politically, and is headed by an assistant director of the Ministry of the Interior. The Sûreté has an intelligence service which largely concentrates on the more sophisticated forms of crime, and a counterintelligence service which also carries out political work and surveillance of aliens. Both intelligence organizations operate all over France, including Paris, unlike the rest of the Sûreté. All police work in the department of La Seine, the Paris area, in the exclusive province of the Prefecture de Police, which has been made internationally famous by one of its fictional inspectors, Marguerite. The prefecture has influenced the organization of police forces in many countries in southern Europe and the Middle East, and we will study it in greater detail in the other French police forces. Anatomy of a police force, the Paris Prefecture. Hopefully the police of the capital city, which is the locale of the coup, will be less powerful than this force. It consists of about 24,000 men and is organized in several directorates, of which the following concern us directly. A. The police municipale is the largest directorate and controls the familiar uniformed flics with their largely symbolic pistols and their much-used truncheons. They are dispersed in 20 district stations in the city and 26 suburban ones. Their standards of training and discipline have been improved under the Fifth Republic, but their capacity for individual brutality does not add up to effective intervention units. In the event of a major disturbance, they are deployed in columns of civilian-type buses, which could be stopped by suitable roadblocks. Their training and mentality will probably make them neutrals if we can prevent their concentrated deployment. B. The police judiciaire is the Paris CID and one of the pioneers of scientific detection. Apart from the incidental intelligence aspect of their work, we can ignore this directorate. C. The intelligence service, like its counterpart in the Sûreté, is mainly concerned with sophisticated crime, drugs, vice, and high-class gambling, but it also has a political section which carries out surveillance work. As in the case of the other security agencies, we will cover the appropriate defensive tactics in the next section. D. Allianz Directorate is a small group mainly concerned with the bureaucratic routines of issuing and checking residence permits. It exercises general surveillance over transient foreigners. The fiches you fill in at the hotel are collected by this directorate, and over foreign communities. In work will only affect us if we have some connection with foreign elements, and particularly with those foreign communities which have a history of political activity in more violent forms. E. Safety of the President. This directorate is concerned with the physical protection of the President, but it also carries out a preventative intelligence function. Following the repeated assassination attempts organized by the OAS and its affiliated organizations, this section of the Prefecture was reinforced with carefully screened personnel taken from the entire security apparatus. Their security system at the Élysée Palace would be a serious obstacle to its seizure during a coup. F. The Garde Républicaine. Though controlled by the Prefecture, this is part of the Gendarmerie and is equipped with light infantry weapons and a variety of transport equipment. It provides the horsed, helmeted, and plumed presidential guard on ceremonial occasions, but its two regiments are hard-hitting mobile forces whose neutralization would be an essential requirement in the event of a coup. The existence of separate police organizations is one of the problems of neutralizing this part of the state security apparatus. In Britain, the division is largely territorial, and the purpose is to give the local interest a measure of control over the police force, but there are also specialized forces which reflect functional divisions. Apart from the county-based police, now being amalgamated into larger groups, there are the following independent police forces: Admiralty Constabulary, Air Ministry Constabulary, Atomic Energy Authority Constabulary, 5 independent harbour police forces, British Transport Commission Police, Civil Aviation Constabulary, and the War Department Constabulary. All these police forces are strictly confined in their operations to the installations they protect, but similar organizations with other countries, where bureaucratic propensities are subject to weaker controls, have shown a remarkable ability to grow and diversify. Though the French police system is particularly extensive, its basic features are shared by police forces in most of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. The paramilitary element is usually present in the form of a field force attached to the regular police, or else in the form of armored car units. The riot control element is reproduced in the special squads of Middle Eastern police forces which, like Beirut Squad 16, can be very effective in spite of all their small size. Where, as in most parts of Asia, a serious insurgency situation has been experienced, this common pattern has been distorted by the proliferation of ad hoc police forces which carry out combined internal security and administrative functions. South Vietnam is the extreme example of this trend, with no fewer than 5 different formations. If the British police system can be said to be divided into largely territorial units, and the French one into largely functional ones, in the United States the division is largely constitutional. Except for the specialized work of the police agencies attached to the various departments of the federal government, only the FBI has nationwide jurisdiction, and then only for certain crimes legally defined as federal. Most ordinary police work is carried out by purely independent local forces maintained at the municipal, county, or state level. The fragmentation of the system means that the police as such would have a very limited intervention potential, in spite of its extensive stock of weaponry and communication equipment. There is, of course, the National Guard, but this has not so far been organized in a manner that would give it real intervention capability, as was shown by the events of the summer 1967, when the Guard failed to perform efficiently, even against untrained civilians. The strategy of the coup with respect to the police system of our target country will therefore have to be diversified as its component parts. The paramilitary element. Paramilitary forces are usually able to perform a military as well as police function. This versatility has resulted in their rapid growth, partly because they may be a genuinely economical way of improving the security system in general, and partly because phones are often easier to secure for them than for the regular police. An opposition party, or public opinion, which may resist an increase in the police budget, can often be persuaded to allocate funds for the Ministry of Defense, and paramilitary forces are usually under its administrative control. In the newly independent countries, the paramilitary element of the police can be a very serious obstacle to the coup, because, while the army is often a recent post-colonial development, the police and its paramilitary units are usually old established organizations. This means that the police can be larger than the army, and also sometimes superior in the quality of training and equipment. If this is the case, it will not be possible to control the paramilitary units by using that part of the army which we have incorporated against them. Fortunately, the governments of newly independent countries are making every effort to increase the size of their armed forces, and thus this unfavorable balance of strength between the army and the paramilitary police is usually reversed a few years after independence. This is perhaps one of the explanations for the sudden spate of coup in Africa in the course of 66 to 7, which came after a phase of very rapid expansion in the armed forces. It's interesting to note that while the ruthless suppression of the colonial powers was often carried out by means of a village constabulary with few military pretensions, the new era of freedom had often required the creation of heavily armed paramilitary police forces. In Ghana, for example, police system was extended after independence in 1957, and armored car units were added to the already existing mobile police. The communication system of the police was made independent of civilian services, and the escort police, which used to be a fez and barefooted force of amiable illiterates, has been turned into an effective riot-breaking unit. If the paramilitary police is large, as compared to those units of the armed forces which we can incorporate, it will be necessary to repeat the whole analysis and infiltration procedure on it. We may indeed be able to concentrate on the paramilitary police and content ourselves with neutralizing the army by technical means. Normally, however, the balance of forces between the means of coercion of the state will not require this, and we will be able to isolate the police for the duration of the coup by using the army. The first step in our neutralization of these forces is to establish the size, deployment, and organization of a paramilitary police. This is usually easier than in the case of the army, because unlike the latter, paramilitary forces are usually stationed in permanent barracks. Next, we will try to find out their degree of attachment to the present regime. But this will not involve the sort of study in depth we made of the army, and it will only be a matter of finding out about their corporate rather than individual outlook. The mentality of the paramilitary police may be bureaucratic, i.e. concerned with jobs and careers, as in the case of the Italian Pubblica Suzzerca and its Salere paramilitary units. If this is the case, a minimal degree of intervention can be expected. On the other hand, their mentality may be parallel to that of the army, i.e. concerned with loyalty and honor, as well as job and careers, or reflect a political association, as in the case of the KGB or Duvalier's Tandon Makuts. If the equipment, deployment, and mentality of the paramilitary police is such as to make them an effective intervention force, we will have to control them in the same manner as the hardcore loyalist forces of the army. The ways and means of the forcible isolation will be discussed in Chapter 5. Usually, however, we will find that the paramilitary police force is essentially bureaucratic. Therefore, in spite of its impressive military bearing and equipment, it will not intervene against the armed export of a coup. I have been unable to find a single case in the last 20 years of a paramilitary police which has actually defended its political masters during a coup, though there are several cases of their intervention on behalf of a coup. The rural police and the gendarmerie. In most underdeveloped countries, the element of the police force is numerically the strongest. This is only to be expected since most of the population of such countries lives in villages and works in agriculture. In spite of its large size, the part of the police will almost never have an intervention potential against a coup. They are often retired NCOs, fully integrated as the rural society they live in, and even when there are provisions for their mobilization and concentrated use, they are unlikely to be assembled, equipped, and prepared in time to intervene against us. Whether the rural policeman is a garde champier with an ancient pistol inscribed La Loi or a Middle Eastern Zabati who plays the village boss, he will hardly want to rush to a remote capital city to protect an equally remote government. The urban and national police. Though this part of the police system will be considerably less dispersed than the village-based rural police, the main components will be just as ineffective against the coup. The personnel of the urban police will fall into three broad categories: A. Crime detection and investigation, B. Normal surveillance, and C. Traffic duties. The CID element will be small, very bureaucratic-minded, and apart from the incidental intelligence aspect, it can be ignored by us. The uniformed police, which carries out all the usual surveillance duties, will be more numerous, but though they may be useful as a riot-breaking force when suitably concentrated, they are unlikely to act against armed opposition in a major political crisis. The municipal police, largely concerned with traffic duties, will usually be staffed by middle-aged men of retiring disposition with small and rusty pistols. There are, however, exceptions such as the Spanish Policía Armada y del Tráfico, whose personnel are politically screened and which is equipped with adequate transport and telecommunications, and thus able and probably willing to intervene in a major political disturbance. A detailed analysis of our target country's police system will probably reveal a problem of composition. After dividing the police force into hard and soft forces, we may find sizable hard subdivisions within the soft elements. Our brief survey has shown that only a small part of the police force is likely to be able to intervene against us, and of this a yet smaller part is likely to do so with any enthusiasm. The natural inclination of the police will be to ride the crisis out, and as individuals to avoid engendering their positions vis-a-vis their possible future employers. The coup may well be planned as a military operation, but it will not, unless partially or totally unsuccessful, involve any actual fighting. Thus, the fact that the police is not heavily armed does not fundamentally explain their low intervention capability as compared to the Army. The real difference between the two is their degree of integration in the civil society. While the Army can develop a corporate ideology and mentality which is divergent or even opposed to the civilian one, the police is usually too intimately involved in civilian life to do so. This can be either an advantage or an obstacle from our point of view. On the one hand, the eccentricity of the Army will mean that a regime can retain its appeal in the closed world of the military barracks after losing it in society at large. This may interfere with our recruiting, but it could work the other way, i.e. we may find the Army is fundamentally opposed to a government which much civilian opinion accepts. Recruiting our forces among the police will almost always be more difficult than the Army. Firstly, the lower level of automatic discipline will mean that recruiting an officer may not bring over his men as well. Further, the fact that policemen live among the public will mean that the internal dynamics which can be generated in the closed world of a military unit would be dissipated in this more open environment, and the snowball effect which would bring entire units over to us after a limited degree of infiltration will not operate. All these factors point the same way. The low degree of intervention capability for as well as against us, and the difficulty of incorporation both indicate that while the Army should be penetrated, the police force can be dealt with defensively after the coup. Thus concludes Section 5.9 of Coup D'Etat by Edward Luttwak. Chapter 3, the strategy of Coup D'Etat, which we will also continue with tomorrow in neutralizing the security agencies. I will see you then. Alam.